So we are now recording on MemberX or the cloud or whatever you want. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Nathan Riggs. I am a program coordinator with the Conservation Department at San Antonio Water System. And I also am an entomologist. My degree is in entomology, so a bug guy doing water conservation, if you can believe that. And with me is Gail Gallegos, and I'll let Gail introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am a conservation consultant. I help everybody with their landscaping needs, help them save water, learn ways that they could change their landscaping up to save water. I check their irrigation. It's a free service that SAWS provides. So if you have an irrigation system, be sure to check out either our gardenstylesa.com website or go to our main SAWS website and find out about those irrigation consults. I am not an entomologist, which is why I have a co-host who is. But I just love bees. I like a lot of
Well,
things, bees, bugs, you name it. But
yes.
that's why I've got Nathan to kind of raise his hand and go, that's not right, Gil. Wait a minute, hold on. And
Oh no,
well,
we're going to have a lot of fun today.
we are.
And just a reminder, there is a Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. If you have a question for us, please put it into the Q&A panel so that we can answer your question later on. Also, somewhere hidden in this magical webinar today is going to be a Water Saver Rewards code word. And so you need to be looking for that code word so that you can take a quiz after this and get rewards points to earn coupons, Water Saver Rewards coupons. So, Gail, what do you say that we get started?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to fire up the presentation that we're going to show. And let me share my screen. All right. So Gail, do you see our beautiful title here?
It's beautiful. Bees, what you didn't know.
All right, so let's get going here. Again, be sure that if you have a question for us, you put it in the Q&A, not the chat, so that we can definitely be able to get to those questions for you and go from there. So let's just jump right in. Now, most people probably haven't seen a honeybee up close like this, but it gives you a chance to understand a little bit about what the difference between bees, wasps, and flies are, because a lot of them mimic each other for various reasons. And so bees are hairier than wasps and flies. Flies can sometimes be hairy, but not very much. And bees have branched hairs for pollen, but there are a couple of other differences here. Flies only have one pair of wings, and wasps and bees have two pairs of wings, or they have four wings. And flies don't sting. Bees and wasps do have the capability to sting, uh, and um, and and so it's interesting to be able to tell them sort of apart, understand what you're looking at. And of course, bees like nectar and pollen. Wasps will eat insects as well as nectar and things like that. And of course, flies eat anything. And sometimes they have a bad reputation. Wouldn't you say, Gail?
Yeah, but
Uh,
we need them. They all play a part, but yeah, not so much.
yes, they all play a role. But most importantly here is we want to talk about bees, and we want to talk about um, honeybees and the other types. So um, tell us about this one, Gail.
Okay, well, most of the time when people say bee or think of a bee, they're really talking about the most common bee, the Western honeybee, or also known as European honeybee, because it is a European species or North African, but it's not native to North America. It's been brought here because we humans have managed and domesticated it for greater than years. We've kept them in hives, we've colonized them, and they provide a lot of services for us. The world, it's estimated that they contribute about $6 billion worth of pollination services. Here in the United States, it's about $3 billion. We're using about the bees' work energy over the worldwide, and that's a lot of work that we truly get for free. Now, the beekeepers, they probably have to have some expense, but for us, there's just a ton of things that we take for granted because it's pollinated. But one of the other things about this European species is that it does compete with, and at times outcompete with, the native species of either bees or even pollinators. Go ahead. When we talk about native species, what are we talking about and how many are there? How about Texas? Well, there's about 4,000 bee species native to North America. And the poster that I have behind me is the same poster you're looking at right there. And although you can't really see the largest one, he's about the size of my hand. Don't worry, he's not the size of my hand.
Yes,
These
it
are all,
is. No, I'm just
yeah,
teasing.
these are all
No.
5 times bigger than what they really are. But even if it's 5 times bigger, that means he's 1/5 of the size of my hand. So they range from less than the size of a grain of rice to 1/5 of the size of my hand. And 4,000 species. There's just all kinds of great things going
That's a
on
lot of
with them.
bees.
That's a lot of bees. And here in
Mhm.
Texas, we're really lucky. I was looking up some other facts and figures on other states. I don't think that we have another state, and maybe our competition would be California as usual, that has
Uh,
800 bee species. That is pretty cool. So we do have a lot of diversity in bees, but through a number of reasons, they're having a hard time, just like you hear about honeybees having a hard time. So we're going to talk today about what we can do to kind of help them and what native species do as opposed to like the common honeybee.
yeah,
And PS worldwide, there's about 20,000 species of bees. So it's a pretty cool diverse group. So in Central Texas, we have a number of bees, and I just don't know how to put it any other way than when you look at these pictures and just go, wow, those are cool. So we have bumblebees. Those are the really big ones that you see kind of buzzing around, and they look like they're like that.
big
And then the
fuzzies.
carpenter, yeah, big fuzzies. And the carpenter bees, they're another one of the bombus group, the big group. And then we have the longhorn bees, and you could see they weren't named after UT Austin. And, and Nathan is really glad about that since he's an Aggie. But look, see that one, that
I'll
picture up at the,
tolerate it.
yeah,
I'll
see the one,
tolerate it.
the right has antennas that are like, yep, that's our longhorn bee. We have leafcutter bees and sweat bees. And someone asked me, why are they called sweat bees? What do they do? I was like, no. They're attracted to sweat. So sometimes if you're sweaty and you see these little things kind of buzzing around you, it's really just the sweat and probably the salt in the sweat. But they're really
Definitely so.
yeah, not too aggressive.
It's a pretty
Go
crazy
ahead.
feeling to be working
Yeah,
outside and sweaty, and all of a sudden you've got this little metallic green bee crawling around on your arm. And of course, your first instinct is to swat it, but sweat bees can sting, so you don't want to swat it. Just let it get a sip and go
yeah.
on about its merry way.
Just trying to get a little bit of salt. You didn't need it anyway.
Nah,
So when we talk about bees, especially native bees, why do they matter? Why are they important? And a lot of times people put that importance on what it does for us, and we're going to talk about that too. But let's talk about the flowering plants that if they didn't have these native bees that are very specialist, they've evolved together to pollinate those specific plants, then those flowering plants could eventually become so important. Likewise,
mhm,
animals, birds, all kinds of other things depend on the fruits and the seeds. I think that, bears have a tendency to get a reputation of tearing into beehives, but they're also one of those fruit and seed eaters too. So depend on bees not only for tearing up their honey, but for the fruit as well. So
it's a
those
fair
are the
trade.
reasons. Yeah,
It's
those
a
are the
fair
reasons
trade.
why wildlife and ecology, it matters to have native bees. And for us, we would have a lot less foods and a lot less. We're going to get into some of those specifics later, but like if you like squash and tomatoes and blueberries, you like native bees.
Believe it
About
or
a third of
not,
our food,
yes.
yeah, a third of our food is pollinated by bees, and that's directly pollinated. And that's the fruit that we're talking about that you kind of have a tendency to think of. But other things like the coffee that you have. And even when we get into beef and dairy, it's dependent. That cow relies on that alfalfa and the clover, which is pollinated by bees.
That's right. That's right. It's very important to kind of think big picture here when you're looking at native bees versus European bees,
Yeah.
the honeybees. It's very important.
And there's a lot of things that the European doesn't pollinate nearly as well, and that's where those native specialist bees come in. So when we talk about what does this one do and what does that one do when we're talking about native bees and European bees, most bee species are not really the social bees. They don't live in colonies. Only a few of those species are social. Most of the native bee species are solitary, which means they live on their own. They go, they make a nest, they put their eggs in that nest, and then, next year they make
Hmm.
another nest.
Yep.
Bumblebees do have a social time, a season. It's the dating game, they get together and then that's. But also solitary bees have all kinds of different areas that they like to nest underground. So when you're covering up your garden or your landscaped bed, you don't have to put mulch over everything. Leave a little bit of bare dirt because there are some bees that like to tunnel into that moist soil and that softer soil. I mean, our soil is that thick. So if you have some good soil, leave some for her, that bee. And then
They'll
likewise,
definitely dig in.
yeah, if you have, trees that maybe have hollows, either stems, limbs, or even other ones, you might find some solitary bees nesting in there. And they also, and this is where they kind of get a bad rap, some of them like to chew holes in wood and
Carpenter bees,
carpenter
for
bees. And
instance. Hmm.
so, if you've got some sunny piles that you've got, just leave them away from your house so that they'll have some areas. Solitary bees don't have a hive to be all super defensive about, so they really don't usually sting you. I'm not going to say they can't, but it's not their goal to do that because they're not really having a home to defend.
Most of the people who get
Honeybees,
stung by the solitary bees are get stung when they handle them, when they swat them,
mhm,
and so
or
that's
trying
where
to
you
get
have to
rid of
be
them.
careful. Yep.
Yeah, they're trying to get rid of somewhere that they found that they're nesting, and so yeah, they are defending their little hole or their little
Hmm.
hollow in the wood. Honeybees are generalist, and that means they'll go do anything that they can get some nectar from, and they'll end up pollinating it, but they're not necessarily a real specialist at some certain plants. And native bees have a lot, there's some that are general. For the most part, there's a lot of specialized natives, and that's because they are indigenous to North America with the involved here that are also from here. They've kind of learned to depend on each other for this. So that's where you get the specialists. Nightshade plants. You've got your tomatoes, you've got your peppers, you've got all kinds of wildflower ones that are in the nightshade family. Those are predominantly pollinated by native bees.
Hmm.
Squash bees, blueberry bees, cactus bees, all of those things are specialized native bees. So as much as we love the honeybee and all the things that it does for us, we got to remember, got to have some respect for some of these native bees that are doing a hard job out there too. The other thing is that they're really cool looking. Your honeybee's pretty, cute, don't think about the Cheerios box with the Honey Nut Cheerio bee, but, a real bee. But the native bees, they're metallic, they're green, they're blue, they have stripes, they're yellow fuzzy, they're black shiny. They're just they're just cool and diverse.
Yep. That honeybees all wear the same uniform when they leave for work every day. So that's it's very interesting. And this is some of the fun part when we get into colors and we talk
Yes.
about um, what kind of colors would you want to have in your garden to be able to attract bees. And it's funny because bees can't see all the colors.
Or
They
they
see
don't see
certain
them.
colors.
Yeah, they don't see
They
them
don't see them the
certainly
same.
same way, and they don't see
That's
certain
right.
colors. So red is a color that we like. I have lots of red flowers, my salvias, my autumn sage, etc. But you know what? And my Turk's cap. But you know who comes to
Hmm.
those? Hummingbirds, butterflies,
Hmm.
but not so much bees. They don't see red the way that we see red. And what they do see, and not going to say they see white and yellow and purple and blue, but what I'm going to say is the way that the bee sees them is a lot more attractive. We'll get into how they see them in a minute. Think about white, think about like the prickly poppy and the Mexican plum. Yellow, you've got your beautiful coreopsis and sunflowers. You know, the new gold lantana, I see bees all over mine on that one. The blue mist flower, while it's extremely attractive to butterflies, you're also going to get a great group of some bees there too. And you've got to think about the whole season of things, which is why I included the picture of the fall aster. You know, we
Yep.
love our spring, our wildflowers, and everything else that we're finally getting through winter, and yay, here's some spring flowers. But we need to think seasonally and keep things going. And so that fall aster is just another one that's just, and actually the mist flower does a good job in the fall as well. But purple,
Mhm.
blues, yellows, and whites. So how do they see those colors? Well,
Isn't
it's a
this
UV,
amazing?
yeah, it's a UV spectrum, right? This is what we see, the yellow dandelion, Texas dandelion. But this is what they see over on the left. And what it is it's the nectar, you know, really, it's like a map. Here, come
Mhm.
here. The
It's a
nectar's right
big neon
here.
sign
Hmm.
just
And the
pointing
cool
straight
part
at it.
is, I didn't include a picture of it, but as flowers get pollinated or as they age, that color, that red, those runway lights that are on them, they change and diminish. And I want you to think about a bluebonnet where the new little flowers or florets have the white center. That's where the runway is saying, land here. And then down at the bottom, you'll see those florets that have a purplish red or red to them in the center. So they're old, they're pollinated, or they're just old. So, you know, that's telling the bee, don't really bother. The lights are off.
Pretty amazing
Yeah.
what they can see. And of course, you know, we everybody has their favorites, Gail. And my favorites sort of have a seasonal flavor to them. You're talking about early in the year, because I think people take for granted that bees are always going to find something to eat. And so you think about spring, you think about red buds. Bees love red buds when they're blooming. And then you move further into the year. Texas sage, cenizo, it doesn't bloom all the time, but when it does bloom, and it can bloom several times during the year, bees are all over those. And it's an amazing sort of pick me up for them. Uh, Giardia, Indian blanket. At my place south of San Antonio, I actually have 3 different types of Giardia. And so it's interesting to see the bees out on the various species. Goldenrod is a great fall plant, not only for honeybees, but for monarchs. Monarch butterflies take advantage of goldenrod flowers during their migrations to Mexico in the fall. And then rosemary. Rosemary, which is great to cook with, also has really delicate, pretty blue flowers, and honeybees love them. And so it's a kind of a, a two-handled benefit there, is you can have the beautiful smell of rosemary and still have bees to watch them enjoy that. So
Likewise,
um,
rosemary as well as cenizo has great drought tolerance. And that's another thing you always
absolutely.
have to think. You know, these things are just flipping through so fast. I'm going to talk about my favorites now. The first one that
Yeah.
came up was mealy blue sage, another excellent native that can handle, it's perennial, you know, yeah, drought, yeah, it may like kind of fade, but guess what? As soon as it cools off or next spring, it's going to come back. It's just a native that doesn't stop. So it's great for butterflies as well as bees. Greg's mist flower, I said it again, it's like butterfly bee magnet. They just go for it. And I've got some in my yard that has a tendency to bloom a little bit more in the fall. And it's just great for when the monarchs come through. But for the bees, especially the natives, gives them something in the fall as well. Pink evening primrose, I get away with my pink, which is part of the red. Because look at that white center. It's just definitely
Hmm.
what's going on. That's the one I want to see under a UV light because I bet it just lights up.
Ooh, I bet it
Yeah,
does
and
too.
it's an early spring one. So again, we're thinking seasonally. Fall aster, explosion. You've got this perennial green plant that sits there all summer long, trucking along, making it through, and then it finally cools off and just says, yeah, I'm ready. Flowers everywhere. It's not as often that it blooms as Texas sage, but it is that prolific, really gives them a punch of food, right? Buffet open. Bee balm, horse mint, it's another kind of like early successional one. But man, it's got a lot of food going on, and it's another I did get to see under the UV light, just like a disco up there. Frostweed has an asterisk by it because I really, really love it. It's the picture that you're looking at right now with the butterflies on it. It does a bunch of cool things. First of all, it kind of takes over in the shade that a lot of plants have difficulty with. And then it blooms in the fall, giving again bees, butterflies, monarchs, everybody a chance to get some food. Either they're migrating or things have already kind of died off from the summer. But if any of y'all know what frostweed does and why it has its name, if we get that really cold weather in the winter, we get below freezing, base of it has been storing water and it just explodes into this really unique, kind of like a snowflake, no two are the same, bunch of frozen ice water. And it's got beautiful patterns to it. But it's a
Really pretty.
great plant for bees. Not
And
commercially
before,
available.
yeah,
Go
that's
ahead.
unfortunate. You couldn't use one of our coupon
Yeah.
programs to buy frostweed, unfortunately. But before we move on, I just want to say hello to everyone in the room with
Oh,
us,
yes.
and to remind y'all to um, use that Q&A box over on the right side of your screen. If you have a question for us, we'll be glad to answer it when we get close to the end there. But uh, be sure to leave us a question, and on top of that, be looking for the Water Saver Rewards code word. It's a code word that you can use on the quiz to get a point if you're a Water Saver Rewards member. If you are not, go to gardenstylesanantonio.com and sign up to be a Water Saver Rewards member, and you can attend events like this and earn points throughout the year to earn Water Saver Rewards coupons for purchase of tools or rain barrels or mulch or anything
Or
except for
plants.
basically pesticides and fertilizers. Yeah, and plants too. We
When you get to that
you can
7
you can do
points
all
thing,
those
I get really excited when I get to the 7 points because then I get
for
$70
sure.
worth of plants, and I'll take that day if I could only.
Heck yeah! And then
Yeah,
if you bundle that with a landscape coupon, another $100, uh, you can really do some pretty things. Have a really nice butterfly garden if you want, or a
you can
bee
change
garden.
your landscape. Yep, exactly.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about things you can do at home to improve the habitat. And looky there on that pretty flower. That's one of those sweat bees there, Gail.
Yep, I took that picture at Hardburger Park, and let me tell you, I was in love with the basket flower, which is another great wildlife flower, but the bee on it was just an added bonus, like an icing on a cake. And there's actually a third little insect over there on the right, and you'd have to zoom in to see it, but I think it's another one just kind of getting in there and getting the nectar. So what can you do? You know that you want to help out bees, you know you want to have a beautiful yard, so what can we do to kind of make that happen? Well, this is the fun part of it. This is what you do as opposed to what you don't do. So you plant purple, yellow, white. Go ahead and I don't want you to not plant red or pink because we do want to also help out hummingbirds. I know you love hummingbirds and
Mm-hmm.
butterflies and everything else, but think of the bees. Don't just plant Turk's cap and autumn sage. Go ahead and get some of those, beautiful blue mealy sage and everything else that, just is going to let the bees have something that they can see with their special UV vision. And also try to always think about native perennial. Not only is it better for the bee, especially the native bees that have evolved with these plants, but it's going to be better for you because these plants have been here, can live through our lovely hot summers and come back again. And so
That's right.
that's going to be an important thing. Think about the diversity of flowering. I have a friend of mine who just wants to plant nothing but, all gold lantana. And then over there, all, red Turk's cap. Well, mix it up a little. As long as you can still plant in bunches where they see a bunch of blue or a bunch of yellow. But don't forget to kind of add diversity into your whole bed. Think about, like we've talked about this whole time, what is going to bloom early? What is going to make it through the summer, and what is going to be blooming in the fall. So if you think about our really weird snow freeze that we had, it affected plants a heck of a lot more than it affected wildlife or bugs. So while the plants are trying to like slowly recover, guess what? We've got warm days and the bees are going, oh, I need some food. What there's all the things
Exactly.
are kind of blooming slow. So if you can get some early bloomers out there in the spring, that's going to help if we ever have weird weather like that again. And then
Sure.
likewise, it's not weird weather when we have hot, dry droughts. That just happens.
Mhm.
So, just think about things that you see or have seen blooming in the summer that are making it and put those in. And don't forget the fall. I love my fall bloomers, late bloomers. They're great. And I love the long bloomers. One of my ones that would have made it, because I really like it on my favorites list, is Zexmenia. It blooms from April to November. It might have a little dormant period in that hot summer, but it's going to come back and it's going to bloom all the way until,
Mhm.
everything goes dormant. It's cool. Sunny locations for flowers. I mean, we all have probably a little bit of shade. If you have all sun, I feel for you, but it's as hard just to have shade too. So think about sunny locations because that's what bees want to go to.
Right.
But also try protecting it from the wind. If we get a lot of wind, then it's going to make it harder for them to fly. It's a lot of energy for them to fly in the wind. So consider where they got like a little corner that might be a little protected, sunny. That's going to
Mhm.
be great. And then practice peaceful coexistence. You go
Oh.
out, you're going to be gardening. Yes. Oh, it's going to be good. I want you to think about this. It's not all about you. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that bee, she's not thinking about you. She doesn't really want to bother you. She just wants to get to her flower, get her some nectar, get back to her sisters, make it happen. So if you see her buzzing around you, she's probably not buzzing around you. She's just trying to get her stuff done. So just leave them be, no pun intended, and we'll probably be okay. Now, with that, if you have severe allergic reaction to bees or just really have a true phobia on them, then I get it. Kind of keep your distance. But other than
Yep.
that, yeah. And so here's some of
Um,
the things. Go ahead.
and
I'm
before
sorry,
we go
Nathan.
forward, one of our coworkers, Juan Solis, just messaged and reminded that even though frostweed is not really a commercially popular or available plant, uh, you can use that $70 rewards coupon to go to somewhere that accepts our coupon and get it. So
Other
be
thing
sure
is,
to
the
keep
more
that in
you
mind.
ask for these, yeah, the more you guys go and ask these nurseries for these native plants. At a time, Zexmedia wasn't even very available. Now it's there all the time. So the deal is that you need to go and say, hey, I really want this native plant. I really love frostweed. I really love this one. And the more people that say it, the more the nurseries are going to hear it and say, we need to start carrying that. And it'll
Yeah,
happen. Be the
power of the
change,
people.
right? Oh, wait,
Yep.
be,
Be the
okay.
change.
All right, so some of the things that you also want to do for the bees is to consider providing pesticide-free water. And of course, you're not going to have pesticide water, but when you apply
Yeah.
pesticide, just make sure that you don't, accidentally get it in where you're actually providing water for them. They also like a little mud, again, so just leave some of it not mulched. They like to get down there and kind of like muddle through there and get some metals and other minerals out of there.
Hmm.
I already talked about creating a sunny brush pile, especially
Yep.
for those solitary bees. That's the kind of habitat they're looking for. Put up
Hmm.
some bee nesting houses. In addition to helping out, they're super cool and fun to watch. I mean, it's like our other things that we put up and watch for, bird feeders and etc. Just another way to help out a little bit of nature.
Yeah. A lot of those bees
Minimize,
like
go
the
ahead.
little tubes. They
Oh
like to
yeah,
nest in the tubes of the bee houses. So it's
yes.
it's a neat to watch.
It is very cool to watch. Minimize your lawn. Think about taking out some grass and increasing the gardening, the native landscaping. First of all, you can use our water saver coupons. And second of all, you won't have to mow it. And so that's less work for you. Help bees with the seasonal challenges. I talked about that freeze that we had. So that's a challenge when we have a delayed spring because of that. And
Hmm.
then maybe we have a delayed spring in or a diminished season because we didn't get the rains in winter that really would help that wildflower season. So I'm going to really bump up my flowering plants because we're not really going to get too much going on in the wild. That's one. Hot, dry summers, we've talked, so just kind of like, especially on our drought days, consider putting out some of that water. You can mix it with a little bit of sugar that gives them a little bit of energy. Just make sure you look up what the right ratio is. You want to keep it right for the bee. It's to fall, depending on our climate, it just seems to be staying hotter, drier, longer. So that means they're going to be active a little bit longer. So keep those flowering plants and maybe some of that water out for them. Wherever you put the water, make sure that you either keep it away from your house or wherever you're going to be, because they will come to. I put it out in my backyard and I think I got a half a colony coming. So sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming. Distance, maybe, somewhere that you don't really go, and it will be appreciated. And then minimize as best you can the use of pesticides. And on that
Yep.
note, I'm going to IPM guide.
And well, and we actually have a question from one of our great interns in our office, Bruce. And Bruce wants to know if we have recommendations for weed and pest treatments that are less harmful if you're trying to build a pollinator paradise. And so we can talk about that a little bit here because since bees and other insects are all sort of subject to wind, you have to be really mindful of where your pollinator plot is or your bee plot is in relation to the rest of your landscape. In San Antonio, our predominant winds are either from the north or northwest or kind of southwest to southeast. And so generally speaking, a north-south direction. So if you have a pollinator plot on your piece of land that sort of sits to the east or the west from the rest of the areas where you might have to use insecticides, that would be more helpful. And and being mindful of if you have to spray something, your spray drifting into areas where maybe you didn't intend for it to go. Now, we have a lot of different preferences amongst our audience, I'm sure, for the types of pesticides they use if they have to use them. Some people just prefer the standard. Some people like to use organic pesticides. And one thing I want to emphasize here from an integrated pest management approach is organic is not non-toxic. People think, oh, it comes from nature, it comes from plants. It's beneficial, and it's not going to harm everything except for what you're trying to control or manage. But organic chemicals in their most basic form come from a plant most of the time, or a soil organism, and some of them will affect everything that they touch. The pyrethrins, for instance, that come from chrysanthemums, they are a broad spectrum insecticide, and they do not discriminate between bees and ants or whatever. So just be mindful that if you like to use organic sprays and things like that, that they still may have effects. And so you always want to check the labels or your recipes, whatever you're making. And if you have to apply weed killers or insecticides in your plot, make it targeted. Just treat the things that you need to treat. Do not just give it the old 100% umbrella coverage thing. Just treat what you need to treat. And we had a question, I had a question recently from a coworker about misting systems. Misting systems have become popular in recent years they put them up around like your patio or your pool, and they periodically spray out a mist to help reduce mosquitoes, especially around places where people like to stay. And, the misting systems most of them are using some sort of an organic insecticide that doesn't last very long. But these misting systems, if insects fly through the mist, it will affect them. So bees can be affected by misting systems. And if you have strong winds, it could blow the mist to your bee area or your pollinator area. So just be mindful of that. We also get questions about whether mosquito repellent spray, mosquito spray, or some of the repellent systems that you can put on yourself, if they have an impact on bees. And while certainly if a bee was to encounter like a cloud of mosquito spray or something like that, they will be repelled, but it's not necessarily going to kill them, but they will be repelled, and because it's a chemical that they're not accustomed to being around. So those repellent systems are not necessarily harmful to bees, but they might make them change course or go away. So keep that in mind. But the most important thing to consider is targeted applications. And you can also, if you want to try to control weeds and things without chemicals, mulch helps with that. Mulching your beds help keep those weeds down, keep the sun away from the soil to germinate the weed seed. So pulling weeds, mulches, things like that, those become a really nice integrated pest management approach, where you don't have to really rely on chemicals as much and as a last resort. All right, so we are now into the fun part here,
Q&A.
where we can answer some questions, and we have quite a few. Let's see, we answered Bruce's. Gail, should we deadhead these bee-friendly plants to encourage more blooms? This is from Talat Shah.
Okay, so I definitely like the idea of deadheading plants. First of all, it keeps everything looking fresh and lovely, and it just helps with, getting the energy to the plant, that's the part of the plant that's still alive. So I agree, encourage more blooms, deadhead. If you don't, it's okay. You probably are just too busy, but it's all right. Do it if you can.
Great, and here's a really good question. From Scott Norman. Will something like pre-strike mosquito torpedo kill bees? Now, this is something that you put in bird baths or water troughs to help control mosquito larvae. And the active ingredient in that is Bacillus thuringiensis, and it is a bacteria that creates a crystal that, when eaten by mosquito larvae or some other strains, when eaten by caterpillars or beetle larvae, will kill them. And it, Bacillus thuringiensis, does not harm bees. It they can drink it. It's not going to. It doesn't have that same active path that it does for caterpillars and mosquitoes. So they should not be harmed by drinking water that's been treated for mosquito larvae in that particular manner. We also have a question from Ann Harris. Do native bees prefer plants over introduced ones? I noticed you mentioned rosemary, and I see it's blooming in the winter when not much else is. And so what do you think about that, Gail?
So I think that I would go with that whole specialist versus generalist. There are native bees that are very specific. We talked about the squash ones and the nightshade ones. They are going to stick to what they've evolved with. But we do have a lot of generalists, and I think about a lot of the bumblebees and the carpenter bees, and with 800 species of bees, going to get them going to whatever's available as well. But so I do think that native plants are going to that they're more accustomed to. The other thing that I didn't mention is there are certain ones, like if you think about marigolds, how densely tight all those little petals are, that's harder for them to get in there and get that nectar. You've got a bunch of different answers that could be correct, but native plants for native bees is what I'm going to stick with. I will go to other ones as well, because they got to go to what's blooming. Food is food. It's kind of like the whole deer question, which, by the way, is down in there. Deer resistant is resistant. We have chosen plants that are not only water saver plants, so it's going to save you that water, because we are the conservation department for SAWS, but also we've chosen primarily native and also the ones that we know are going to do okay, deer resistant. Nothing is 100% deer proof, because when we have our hot, dry summers, the deer may just go ahead and get into whatever it was. And when things are hungry, they're going to be opportunistic. But for the most part, let's stick with native, perennial, drought tolerant.
No kidding. This is a really good question, and one that I don't necessarily know the answer to right off the top here from Nick Turner. I joined late, so I may have missed this earlier, but are beehives legal in the city limits? I've been thinking
I
about
know.
getting one and talking to my neighbors about it first, of course.
Mm-hmm. So yes, you can. I do know some people who do have beehives within the city. There are some regulations, and I don't want to quote things that I don't know. Hive needs to be a certain distance from buildings, from neighbors, etc. And there's probably a number of hives that you can have, a limit, kind of like with chickens. But yes, you can have bees. And when we talk about this, it is that European Western honeybee, Apis mellifera, because that's our domesticated bee. So you can do that in the city. Yes. To City of San Antonio website, you can call 311 and find out where website you can find that ordinance and what all the details are.
Great, and you can also find it on the Texas state law about beekeeping and what the regulations are. So that's some really good question there. Um, so
I bet you could
let's
call
see.
AgriLife too, huh?
Yeah, I used to work for the AgriLife Extension here for many years as the entomologist, and Molly Keck is the entomologist over there now and could probably help you with that question. Molly is fantastic, and some of you may know who she is. And I certainly support Molly, and she is a great resource for our local area for sure.
She just wrote a bee article for us that we just put on our gardenstylesanantonio.com website. So be sure to read that. It's
That's
it's a
right.
great it's a great article about the importance of our bees.
We have a question in the chat. Is garlic oil spray harmful to bees? I would say it would be repellent to bees, but probably not harmful to them. Now, any kind of oil, if bees get oil on their wings, it does affect their ability to fly until it sort of gets if it gets dissipated in any way. So I guess from that standpoint, harmful being they can't really fly as well after you spray it on them. But otherwise, it's probably just going to be a bit repellent more than anything else. That's from Ken. So thanks, Ken, for that question. Let's see, what else?
Okay, so something was mentioned by, let me see, I'm gonna find it again. Oh, I'm sorry, I can't find your name, but you brought up the fact that deadheads flowers again that we talked about. Do you deadhead your
Oh, that was
flowers?
Pamela. Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Pamela. Uh-huh.
And she said, well, you know what? Birds come and eat those seeds. That's true. Look at the kind of flower it is. And if it's something that has seeds that lesser goldfinch or any other great bird that you like to have in your yard is going to come and kind of feast on that, go ahead and leave it. That's a real great reason to not deadhead. Saves you a little work too.
Oh, and we just had a really good comment from Todd Phillips. Not sure if native or not, but coral vine is a long blooming drought tolerant honeybee magnet. Very good call on that, Todd. Yes. And it's pretty. The flowers are pretty too. So honeysuckle falls into that category as one of those nectar plants that bees happen to like, as well as hummingbirds. So and they smell nice, which is, having a flower that smell nice is good too. So let's see, we still got almost 15 minutes left in our time with y'all. We have something from Ann here. A friend wants to put a honeybee hive box in my backyard. I really like the native bees. Will this make natives avoid my garden? Honeybees and native bees aren't really all that adverse towards each other from that standpoint. So, but if you have a nectar source uh, the the regular honeybees are probably going to outcompete your native bees. I mean, just in sheer numbers. So that's something to think about, just as far as having them there. The natives aren't going to avoid your garden at all, and that will certainly be one here. Ken has a really good question. Are bees and bats compatible? Compatible, and you know what? Bees and bats are active at different times of the day. Uh, Bats are active at night, and in the late evening, all the way through night. Bats primarily feed on moths and sometimes mosquitoes. It's kind of a misnomer. Bats don't eat as many mosquitoes as you think they do. They primarily eat moths and beetles and things like that. And of course, bees are active during the day. Bees need the sun to be able to navigate where their food is. And so, no, bees and bats are compatible from the standpoint that they're sort of active, or to use the term, it's like night and day. um, so, oh, Penny's got one here. Since bees are attracted to certain color flowers, are they also
Mm-hmm.
attracted to us if we wear those colors, or do
I'm
the
wearing
flowers
blue.
emit the color? Yep. So, yes, bees can be attracted to clothing if it reflects. Remember, we're talking about it has to reflect the right color back. Um, and so, like both Gail and I are wearing our blue saws shirts, but whatever, and we see blue, but the bees probably are not seeing the same color because I don't ever have bees come up and check me out when I'm wearing my blue sauce shirt. So it's probably reflecting a different color to them. But
You're
if
right.
you were to wear a shirt that
That
reflected
had
UV light,
or even had like with the truck that we drive has flowers, what do you call the wrap on it? And
yep.
I have had bees especially land on the yellow parts of that truck. And they're just like, what's going on? I don't understand. So it's definitely reflecting some kind of UV. So yes, clothing could. I don't think this solid blue shirt they don't think that there's a big giant blue or whatever they see as blue flower on me. But like, what if I was wearing, one of those tropical shirts that had all kinds of blue and yellow flowers on it? I might be attractive to a bee.
You might. You just might. Here's a question from Danny Leal. Can we get a list of the best flowers to have for bees, please? You can go to gardenstylesanantonio.com and check out our galleries. We have lists of pollinator plants that you can look at on gardenstylesanantonio.com. So that
And our
is
two articles that are up right now are all
yes.
about
Hmm.
bees. Molly Keck did one, and I think Sarah Galvan did the other, and they're both just
Yep,
excellent listing plants that will really help the bees in our area.
for sure. This okay, Mark Peterson is our coworker.
Mark
He has a question.
Peterson,
What is the best bee for San Antonio? Um, Mark,
Mark.
Mark. The best bee for San Antonio, I guess, is all of them. And
They don't have a
they all,
fiesta bee, but if they had a
yeah, that's
fiesta
true.
bee, that would be the best bee for San Antonio.
That's true. The
Yeah,
Fiesta bee, and who knows? Maybe there's a little brightly colored bee out there somewhere that hasn't been discovered yet. That
right. We can
that could
name
be
it
the
Fiesta
Fiesta bee.
bee.
Good one, Mark. Thanks. Um,
He also has a
Barbara.
question.
Oh,
He also has another question, being the
oh,
arborist that he is. What is the
yep.
best tree for bees, or what's a good tree for bee? And I would definitely say, the Mexican olive, and I
Hmm.
had the Mexican plum up there. Anything that blooms those great colors that we talked about. You got Esperanza, not really a tree, but it blooms great yellow. A lot of trees, an Anacacho orchid tree blooms white. So anything that's blooming those colors that they love. Now,
Hmm.
in nature, in wildlife, in nature preserves and parks, I have seen the gumbamelia when it blooms,
Yep.
because it's got white fuzzy little blooms,
Hmm.
and I've seen them covered with bees. So that's
Yep.
another great. There's just a lot of
Red
great
buds.
bees.
Yeah.
Red buds with the pink. Mm-hmm.
Yep. The flowering crabapple which is
Yes.
basically it's an ornamental, but flowering crabapple, Bradford
Rough,
pear,
rough leaf
um,
dogwood,
yes, rough leaf.
hawthorn. We could spend
Um,
all day on those great
we
trees,
could,
Mark.
we sure could.
I think that
We
was
could.
on purpose, huh?
Yep.
Yeah.
And our lovely coworker Donna also mentioned citrus trees are great for bees.
Citrus.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. If you still have citrus trees left over after the Great
Yeah.
Freeze, congratulations. And but citrus trees are great, and they're one of those that are pollinated by bees. So they need bees to do that. And we had a question from Barbara. I was late getting in a while ago, but did y'all discuss beneficial insect
Insect
houses and the
houses.
bees that come to those, such as mason bees? We did touch on bee houses a little bit, but we didn't get too far in depth. But um,
We talked
bee,
about putting them up,
yeah,
get
putting
them
them
out
up,
there, watching them.
and if any of you have ever seen a bee house, they're usually built with a section that's like full of little rocks and pebbles with gaps and spaces in them, a section that's full of tubes like bamboo, uh, because a lot of the bees nest in tubes, like leaf cutters, mason bees, orchard bees. They like to nest in tubes. They stuff it full of leaves, lay an egg, cap it with some leaves, and they just keep going until it's full, and then they find another one. So yeah, putting a bee house in your yard is a great way to attract uh, these little native pollinators to your yard. And a lot of these bees are colorful, as we've talked about. A lot of them are metallic, have metallic colors, and so it's definitely something to enjoy. Uh, so let's see, we have some Palo Verde is another tree. Yes,
Yes, good tree.
that's great. And Talat Shah has a question. I see holes dug in the bare areas of my lawn. Are these made by bees? Sometimes they can be they can be ground nesting bees. They can be beetles. They can be some of the ground nesting wasps. They could be ants, but there are these little solitary bees that like to nest in the ground. And a lot of times, Gail, you'll see them in bunches, like
Yeah,
10 or 12 or 20 or 30 holes at a time. Um,
right.
oh, Seth's got one. Seth's our coworker.
Yes.
Did and here you go, Gail. Is there a particular reason why sweat bees are attracted to sweat? And is there anything one can do to attract them specifically to their gardens?
So they are attracted to sweat because of the salts in your sweat. And so I am going to have to rely on entomologists to say, I mean, we're not going to put salt in a little bit of salt water, but maybe that's also why they like the mud because it's got
Yep,
salts and minerals in the mud. So maybe if you
exactly.
could leave some of your garden unmulched and then kind of maybe keep it moist, not too much water. We are water conservation, but nice and moist so they would be attracted to that. And maybe, just maybe, your salty sweat won't taste so good or as good.
Who knows? I mean, it depends. If you're dehydrated, your sweat's going to
Yeah.
be extra salty.
Yeah.
And,
Drink lots of water.
sure, make more sweat.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. All right. So, we've been teasing,
Yes, we
Gail, we've been
have.
teasing these
We
people
have.
about code words and,
Can I give them a
all this
hint?
clandestine talk.
A can, a
Yeah.
hint. Okay, so it's one of my favorite, but you can't
Hmm.
necessarily get it at most nurseries. And I said, go tell the nurseries you want. Go ahead, Nathan. The big
There it is.
reveal.
The secret code word, the secret decoder word
Frostweed.
is frostweed. Ladies and
Frostweed.
gentlemen, frostweed is the code word. The code word is frostweed.
So
And
I don't want to see all the people just like disappearing now because like you know the frost. But I also want to give a shout out to Dick. Took a lot of the photos that I used in my presentation. He's just a that lives in the neighborhood across the Salado Creek from me, and he is an excellent photographer. And thank you, John, for the photos.
yep. So once again, your Water Saver Rewards code word slide here, frostweed.
Frostweed.
The code word is frostweed. So uh, with that, we would like to thank you all for joining us today. We had a nice crowd of
Great
those
questions.
people that signed up. The questions were fantastic, and so
If there was any
we look
question
forward.
didn't get answered, Mark Peterson's going to tell you to ask the Garden Geek.
That's
Go
right.
to
You can
our
go to
conservation.
gardenstylesanantonio.com and
Yep.
ask the Garden Geek, and it may end up filtering down to one of us again. So
Yep.
we'll be glad to answer those questions. But thank you all very much for joining us today. And we hope you learned a little something with us. We had fun, and y'all stay safe and continue to enjoy the outdoors.
Thank you very much. I had a great time and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, y'all.